When most people think about World War II tanks, one name usually stands out: the German Tiger I. This heavy tank was built to impress and to scare. On the battlefield, it had a reputation for being nearly unstoppable, thanks to its thick armor and its powerful 88mm gun. For Allied soldiers, running into a Tiger often meant big trouble. But here's the surprising part. Germany only built about 1,300 of them, and today, fewer than 10 are left. So what happened to all the others? Were they destroyed in battle, abandoned, or simply scrapped after the war? In this video, we'll look at the real story of the Tiger I tanks, how most were lost, and why a few still survive. The Tiger. It wasn't just another German tank, it was meant to be a game-changer. Production started in 1942, and by the time the last one rolled off the line in August 1944, only about 1,347 had been built. That's a very small number compared to other tanks of the war. For example, the Soviets made over 50,000 T-34s, and the Americans built more than 49,000 Shermans. The Tiger at first was rare, but it was designed to dominate. It first saw action on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union. Later, it was sent to North Africa under General Rommel, and then to Western Europe, including Normandy after D-Day. Wherever it showed up, it made a big impact, both in combat and in reputation. But the Tiger had problems. It was expensive, slow to build, and often broke down. It needed a huge amount of fuel, which Germany was running short on. While it was feared in battle, its mechanical issues and limited numbers meant it couldn't change the course of the war. Still, in the eyes of soldiers who faced it, the Tiger I quickly became a symbol of German strength. For all its power, most Tiger I tanks didn't survive long. In fact, many never made it out of battle alive. Some were knocked out by enemy fire, though it often took multiple hits from anti-tank guns or artillery to bring one down. Others were destroyed from the air, as Allied fighter bombers became more effective later in the war. But surprisingly, just as many Tigers were lost without ever being shot at. The tank was extremely heavy and complicated, and it broke down often. Engines overheated, transmissions failed, and tracks snapped under the tank's massive weight. In muddy or snowy terrain, it could get stuck and be impossible to move. Crews sometimes had no choice but to abandon their Tigers and destroy them with explosives so they wouldn't fall into enemy hands. Germany's worsening supply problems also played a big role. Spare parts were scarce, fuel was running out, and repair facilities couldn't keep up. By the last year of the war, a huge portion of the Tigers were sitting disabled, not destroyed in combat, but simply left behind. So while Allied troops feared the Tiger I, the truth is that most of them were lost to mechanical failure, lack of fuel, or deliberate destruction rather than enemy fire. When the war ended in 1945, the few Tigers still standing didn't last long. The Allies had no interest in keeping hundreds of captured German tanks around. They wanted to rebuild Europe, not maintain giant fuel-hungry machines. Most Tigers left on battlefields were dragged away, cut up, and melted down for scrap metal. At the time, these tanks weren't seen as priceless history. They were just wrecks made of steel. Local farmers and towns often joined in. A Tiger left abandoned in a village or field was worth money in metal. And Europe badly needed raw materials after years of war. Huge scrapyards were filled with German tanks waiting to be cut apart. By the late 1940s, the vast majority of Tiger I tanks had completely disappeared. A handful, however, escaped this fate. Some were set up as war monuments in Europe, left where they had been knocked out in battle. Others were kept by the Soviets for study, since they were curious about German technology. Slowly, a few found their way into museums or private collections. But compared to the thousands built of other tank types, the Tiger I almost vanished. Its survival today is more luck than planning. Out of the more than 1,300 Tiger I tanks built, only a handful survive today. Just 7 complete examples are known. Each one has its own unique story, and together they give us a rare glimpse into what was once the most feared tank of World War II. The most famous survivor is Tiger 131, housed at the Tank Museum in Bovington, England. Captured in Tunisia in 1943, it was repaired and tested by the British before ending up in the museum's collection. Today, it's the only tiger eye in the world that still runs, carefully maintained and sometimes demonstrated to the public. Seeing it move and fire gives a real sense of what soldiers faced. Another survivor sits in Vimoutiers, France, left where it was abandoned in 1944. This tiger has become a local monument, resting outdoors for decades before preservation efforts began. Other tigers are displayed in places like Kubinka Tank Museum in Russia, the Deutsches Panzer Museum in Germany, and collections in France and the United States. Some private collectors, like the Wheatcroft collection in the UK, are also restoring pieces of tigers, though complete running examples are extremely rare. Each surviving tank is now treated as a treasure of history. When you realize that less than 1% of all tiger eye tanks still exist, it makes their survival even more remarkable. The reason so few tiger eye tanks are left today comes down to three main factors: war, resources, and practicality. First, most were destroyed during the fighting. By 1945, very few were still operational, and many had already been blown up, abandoned, or stripped for parts. Second, the post-war world was short on materials. Steel was valuable, and wrecked German tanks were seen as a quick source. Scrapping them made sense at the time, especially since no one imagined they'd one day be rare collector's items or museum pieces. Finally, restoring and keeping a tiger was extremely difficult. The tank was massive, complex, and expensive to repair even during the war. After 1945, there were no spare parts, no factories, and no reason to maintain them. To most people, a tiger was just a pile of broken machinery. That's why only a tiny number made it through. The few that do survive are mostly thanks to chance. Tanks abandoned in the right place, captured for study, or saved as monuments before the scrapyard could get to them. The few tigers that survive today aren't just museum pieces, they're windows into history. For historians, engineers, and tank enthusiasts, they show the reality behind the legend. Instead of just reading about the tiger's power or flaws, people can actually see the size of its armor, hear the roar of its engine, and understand why it was so feared. For veterans and their families, these tanks also carry symbolic meaning. They represent the danger Allied soldiers faced and the technology Germany relied on to fight a losing war. Standing next to one, it's easy to see why the tiger became almost mythical during the 1940s. Beyond the battlefield, surviving tigers remind us of the importance of preservation. If all of them had been scrapped, an entire chapter of World War II history would only exist in photos. Thanks to a few lucky survivors, we can still connect with that past in a direct, powerful way. The tiger. I may have been feared in battle, but time proved even more unforgiving than its enemies. Most were destroyed, scrapped, or abandoned, leaving only a handful today. Yet those survivors keep the legend alive, reminding us how powerful and fragile history can be. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the story of the Tiger Y, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. We've got plenty more World War II stories coming your way,